Okay, chapter 40, Hemshech Ayin Beis, volume 1, page Samaches, 68. We're in the middle of the Discourse, it's the 10th Maimer, the 10th Discourse. So, a little context. Ayin Beis obviously is a big, monumental work, and it consists of over 1,500 pages, of which the Rebbe Rashab didn't even finish writing the whole Hemshech. Most people don't even know that. You think after 1,500 pages, you've said a lot, you know. And the Rebbe Rashab wrote it almost to the end of his life, which means we have proof that he's been writing even Tafresh Ayin Tes. So bottom line is, to really try to make sense of the Hemshech, it's important to break it into parts. So there's the general theme of the whole Hemshech. The way I see it now, the Ayin Beis is coming to answer the big question of the interface. How does a material world connect to spirituality? How does the finite connect to the infinite? How does the mundane connect to the divine? These are two opposite entities. Something that's mortal and limited, how could it connect to something that is godly and unlimited? And as I said many times, this is based on the premise. You could say, well, who says there's a connection? It's based on the premise that there's Achdus Hashem. You say Hashem Echad. That God is one. It doesn't just mean one God. It means that all of existence is part of this unity. It's also based on the foundation, which is the whole foundation of Kabbalah and Chassidus, that God wants a relationship with us. If it was just God being a master and we're a slave, so then we don't have to have a relationship. The master gives orders and the slaves do what we're told to do. Then there's no relationship. A servant in a king's palace doesn't need to have a relationship with the king. He just follows orders. But the Eibishter made it clear that he wants a relationship. Where did he make it clear? First of all, he created the human being, B'Tselem Elokim. The Tzalmenu Kedem say, no, this is a recurrent theme in Ayin Beis. He keeps bringing back that posuk. Means he created us in his image. A master doesn't create a slave in his own image. They're two different entities. You know, when Avram tells Elazar, his Eved, he says to him that, you want to make a shidduch. He says, we're not from the same substance. We don't match. So that's the first thing. Then the Eibishter said in the Torah, V'yadaitis Hashem, you should know me. Da'asa l'ke'evicha, v'ahavtis Hashem l'kecha, v'yiras Hashem l'kecha. And the Torah is filled not just with mitzvahs that relate to action, but related with relationship. Know me, emulate me. Mahu chanon afata chanon. So you're full of references. I'm just saying this as a basis. So therefore God wants a relationship. The question is, how can be a relationship between two entities that are opposites, that are so antithetical? I would say this is a fundamental theme that Ayin Beis is coming to address. Chassidus b'chlal, but Ayin Beis specifically, and that's why everywhere you turn, you see the focus on interfaces, what we call today interface. That there's a mamutza. And the whole Seder Shtalshlus, the whole cosmic order, and the 10 spheres, and the worlds, are all meant to be this bridge. Atzilus, in general, is the interface. Atzilus is where Lakus meets man. Because Atzilus is a structure of 10 spheres, the Adam Alien, but it's a divine world. So if we could align our so-called structure to God's structure, that helps us connect then to God that's beyond structure. So Ayin Beis goes through all these steps from the beginning all through the whole thing. And the focus here, as I would say, as opposed to Samach Vov, the main focus I would say is more like Ben Shenasa Eved. The focus there is to be an Eved, meaning Kabbalah Seil, to connect to that which is beyond us, to recognize that God is Shalei Berech. And Ayin Beis, the focus is the other way around. I would say Eved Shenasa Ben. The focus is on the closeness. That even though God is Bein Areich, still He wants us to have a connection with Him. So in a way, Ayin Beis is much more focused on the Torah. Samach Vov is much more Tefillah. And you can see this throughout. When you start learning the Hemshech, you see it start emerging. Obviously there's overlap. It's not purely Ayin Beis is Mamayla Lamata and Samach Vov Lamata Lamayla, meaning from the bottom up. But there's a focus. That's why in Ayin Beis he goes much more according to the Shitta, the approach that the spheres have, even the energy has, even the air has spheres in it, because wanting to show that even Alakus there's structure. And in Samach Vov it goes more to the Shitta the other way, that the airs don't have any shape, which are both true. And I discussed it in previous classes. So that's the overall thing. Where we are in the beginning of Hemshech Ayin Beis, if I would break it down into parts, I would say that the first 48 chapters focus on Eir Pnimi, the structure of existence. The first thing that Rebbe Rashab does is, after establishing there's a keser, which is the first mamutza between God, the divine, and the worlds, and existence, because God has to want it. Without Nesava Kodesh Baruch Hu, without God desiring, there's nothing. So desire is the first step. But then, to understand what is the desire, what is the rotzen, what is keser, goes the whole. First, we have to understand the structure. So I would say the first 48 chapters is completely about the structure, what is called in Chassidus Pnimi. This means integrated energies. Pnimi is defined by the fact that an energy manifests inside of a container. The best example, as he uses in the first chapters, is Keiches Ha'adam, Keiches HaNefesh, the faculties of the soul. That each of us is a structured being, a human being, but what does being alive mean? That you're not just a body, you also have energy. There's eyes, there's ears, there's a nose, there's a mouth, there's a mind, there's a heart, there's legs, there's a body. And the energy of the soul fits into each part, tailored to it. It's not like just one electricity that runs into the body, but the energy actually fits. The energy that the power to see fits into the eye. The power to hear is the ear. And if you took a person's brain, God forbid, and put it into the feet, it wouldn't work. Everything has to be in its particular place. The keli and the eir are tailored and perfectly fit to each other. And this is a classic example of eir pnimi. And the same is true in the divine structure. And these chapters, as I said, the first 48 chapters, which we're getting close to the end of, all discuss this eir pnimi. Then he'll move from there, the Rebbe Rashab, to eir makif. What is keser? What is beyond structure? Rotzen would be the classic example. Desire doesn't have a place. Where in the body does desire rest? It doesn't have a place in the body. It's overall. And the same thing in the Lamaila. There's something that is beyond the structure. And then it will continue on talking about these two within the structure, beyond the structure. This is like the Ovis and Matan Teda. Talking about Teda being the force that brings something that's higher than existence into existence. Then he goes into deeper levels of the interface, that in Keser itself, it's Chochma Stima, it's the unconscious mind. And then, at the end of this volume, he starts beginning the discussion of Torah and Tefillah, the two ways to connect, from the bottom up, from the top down. But wherever you go, the underlying theme in Ayin Beis is the connection between the structure of existence and that which is beyond the structure. And that's why it's so important, because it's relevant to every person. Every person wants to have transcendence, wants to experience something that's beyond. The question is, how do you experience beyond when you have to deal with day-to-day realities? You have to work, you have other issues, and so on and so forth. So Ayin Beis is like a blueprint for that. With that being said, where we are right now, after developing a whole discussion about eir pnimi, what it is exactly, and discussing the difference between eris and kelim, that energy is more transcendent in nature. For example, if you define, someone says, what does an eyeball look like? An eyeball is a physical thing. You can relate to it, you can measure it. What does the keach hariyah look like? The power to see, that you can't measure. But it's still defined. So after a long discussion of this definition, so he starts going now into, in the last few chapters, we've been discussing what means ma'ala, mata, and ruchnis. What does it mean when something is higher and lower? So in the physical world, higher or lower means the first floor, the second floor. Now, critical to point out, that I've said many times, and I said it to you guys yesterday too, that the key thing in Chassidus is to train us to think differently. It's not just about trying to understand new ideas. It's partially a different type of thinking. When you think Begashmis, you think everything is Zman Mokim. Today, yesterday, tomorrow. In Mokim, higher, lower, east, north, south, west. I'm traveling a mile, 100 miles, 50 miles. Something is 5 feet tall, 6 feet tall. In Ruchni, you have to think conceptually. So what is higher and lower? That's what he's been discussing in Ruchnius, in Elamus, which is, of course, the structure of eir pnimi. What is the structure that God created? Pure concept, the conceptual structure. So before we get to the physical structure, which evolved from the spiritual structure, what is spiritual structure? So generally, the Rambam says that mokim in Ruchnius means maila. It means quality. Something of higher quality is considered higher, something of lower quality is lower. In the Lashon of Chassidus, he says it's the measure of eir that something has. When you say Chochma is higher than Bina, what it means is, it's not higher, physically higher. It means that Chochma is superior to Bina because it has a lot more eir in it, has a lot more energy in it. that when the Nakuda of Chochma, the spark of an idea, has in it a lot of intensity. Once you develop it in Bina, it loses that power. Similar to, for example, let's say a teacher and a student. When the teacher has the idea in his mind, so it's a lot more energy there. When he puts it into Kalim, starts explaining it with examples and with metaphors and the details, as it goes into more details, it loses that energy. That doesn't mean that later the student can't regain the energy and retrace the steps, but at that point, Bina has less Gili, has less Eir, therefore more Kalim. So that's one thing that he established. That is what he calls the Ribuy Amiyut, that Mokum is defined, in this case, Ma'alamata, by Ribuy Amiyut. More energy, less energy. That's one thing. The second thing is connected to Kiruv and Richuk. What makes something more energy? When it's closer to the source. Something closer, as he puts it, to the top of the Kav, which is the ray of light. Think of it like a student that's a more developed student. Why does he have more energy? Because in a way his mind is closer to the mind of the teacher. What is closer? Again, doesn't mean physically closer. It's not like he's sitting closer to him. His mind relates to the teacher more. Whereas a beginner student is the opposite, is further away. Then he goes to, that was discussed in chapters, what I just said now, was chapters 34, 30, starting 33. Chapter Lamed Gimli begins the discussion of Ma'ilo Mata. So what I just said sums up 33, 34, 35. And this is both in the spheres and in the ilmus. The spheres is the DNA of existence, the ilmus is the dimensions of one level higher or lower than the next, which I elaborated on. I'm not going to go through that right now. Then he explained that this difference is not just mitzad the kelim. In other words, the difference between the students, or the difference in Chochma Bin, is not just that Boina has more kelim and therefore less eir. It's because the eir itself is of a higher, it's because the eir itself is more intense in Chochma. And then he added that the real Ma'ilo Mata is not just Ribuy Amiyut, it's not just how much energy there is or how little energy. They're fundamentally different. Chochma is a fundamentally different entity than Bina, and therefore Chochma has a lot of energy. So it's not that first it has energy. In other words, it's not like, I gave the example, it's not like, let's say you have a big pipe, and in order to get it to your house, you need to make a big pipe into a small pipe. So in other words, Chochma and Bina, there's no real echus difference. There's no qualitative difference. It's just a Bina, to get it to the next level, you have to diminish Chochma. No, that's not the case. In other words, that would just be relative then. It's absolutely different. Chochma has its own particular, the Hatzilus of Chochma, meaning when Chochma was emanated, it has its own particular power. And because it's an Akudah, because it has such intensity, that's why it has so much energy. Bina is a different type of power. So besides the fact that one sphere leads to the next, each one actually has a distinct personality. That's what he established in chapter 37. And then in 38, he began discussing that... chapter 37 is still the Ribuy Amiyut, I'm sorry. Yeah. In chapter 38, he just established what I just said, that they fundamentally have different levels. And now, in chapter 39, the last chapter we learned, he's discussing how Chochma and Bina are fundamentally different. Chochma is teifes, the etzem, the essence of something. Bina is only teifes, only grasps the giluyim of something. And he explains how Chochma, in other words, so they're be'echus, they're completely different type of realities. What's the difference in etzem and giluyim? So I explained etzem and giluyim, as he explains it here. Etzem is when you get something in a fundamental way, and not as it's broken down into details. Like an example, if someone asks you, explain to me what does it mean, what is music? And they never heard music before. So you can go into a long explanation of what music is, but you're only going to describe what's called Yidiyas HaMetzias, the Metzias of music. And at the end of it, you're going to say, look, if you're smart, you're not going to say at the end, you'll say it at the beginning. You want to know what music is, let me turn on music and listen to it. So all the biyurim in the world, by the wisest person, cannot come to that 1 second of listening to music. You listen to it, that's it, that's music. So that's muchus of something. Metzias is knowing it exists. We know, for example, that we have a soul. It's obvious. I'm not getting into what kind of soul and so on. What's the proof? Because the moment before conception of a new child, before the seed becomes will become a fetus and then a child, and the moment of death, something changes. Here, the same body, what happened to it? The second the soul leaves it. Some energy force. So we know there's a soul. We know there's a life force. But someone asks you, what is this life force? You say, I know it exists. I know the mitzias of it. The muhus. Now, we could learn the muhus. We could study it. But it's much more complicated than muhus. You can know the mitzias of many things and not know the muhus. So he says that Chochma is tefes the muhus. That when you have a concept comes into your mind, that moment that you have a flash of an idea is the essence of the idea. And Bina, as soon as you start talking about it and start developing it, it's already a step away from the essence. The truth is, as I pointed out, there's no such thing as really talking about Chochma without little Bina. Because how many ideas do fall into our head that we don't even remember? As soon as you remember an idea, as soon as you begin fleshing it out, it's already the Bina of Chochma. So Chochma is that type of thing. And to understand to understand that, he began by speaking. He continues and says that Meichin the Abba, which is the intellect of Chochma, is higher than Ishtalshlus. And to understand what that means, higher than Ishtalshlus, we now began a whole discussion of what is Ishtalshlus, or the way he puts it, Ishtalshlus ilu v'ol, cause and effect. Which means he goes into a discussion of what is ilu v'ol to explain that in etzem, in Chochma, there's no levels. I gave the example. The Rebbe said, when they asked him, Tov Shin Yud, they asked him why he prints an Olka Hosforim and says, Kevish Shalshal Sa'ir. Look on top of everyone, Shalshal Sa'ir. So they asked the Rebbe, why not Shalshal Samoir? Shalshal Sa'ir means the chain of light. So it's been Shalshal Samoir. The Rabbeim are Moir, not Ir. So the Rebbe answered, Moir is stuck in Shalshalas. Amoyer is atzmi. You can't even say this. If you speak about the Rabbeim as an essence, as a moyer, as the source, it's only one source. There's only one Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe in every generation. If you took the Giluyim of each Rebbe, so the Alter Rebbe is Chochma, the Mittler Rebbe is Bina. There's a difference. Each generation needs its manig that fits that generation. So the etzem of a Rebbe is really one. It says in Teirah Shalom, the Alter Rebbe would have been Zman HaTanoim, it would have been Atana. Zman HaMaroim, it would have been Nameira. So he says this, literally the same thing here. He says hishtalshlus, that something gets weaker or stronger, which is hishtalshlus, that something gets diminished. Like I said, the example, a teacher, let's say, is teaching an idea, and that idea he has to bring down level to level till he gets to a student. That does not exist in the etzem. Etzem, there's no hishtalshlus in the etzem. You can't diminish etzem. Etzem is, he doesn't say the lashon here, but kashatef is b'mitzaseh. When you grasp part of it, you grasp all of it. But as Giluyim, meaning in Tziyur, like he says, by Bina you capture the idea is you break it down, absolutely. Let's say you write up an idea on paper. So there, of course, there are levels. You can explain it deeper, you can explain it less, you can develop it more, and so on. Chochma, therefore, doesn't have, Chochma is a Nekuda. A Nekuda, if you look at a dot, a point, it has no Ma'alamat, has no top, has no bottom, has no parameters. So it definitely does not have levels. I mean, in Chochma there are levels, but it's not because Chochma is being diminished, it's just because Chochma has in it. It has been a Sheba Chochma and so on. But Chochma itself, the idea is Atzmi, as he says, and that's called the Ma'alim Mishtalshlus. That's the word Ma'alim Mishtalshlus. It's higher than a process. There's no process within Chochma. In Bina there's a process. What is the process called in the way he's describing it here? Ilah v'ol, cause and effect. So he begins to explain that there are two types of ilah v'ol. One is that ilah and ol means cause and effect. One is that the cause and the effect are not the same muhus. They're not the same entity. But one gives birth to the other. The example would be a mother giving birth to a child. The child is not an extension of the mother. It has the mother's genes, it also has the father's genes, but a child will be in a separate entity. If an egg was not fertilized, a child wouldn't be born. A mother just growing older does not make her a mother. What is it in Keiches HaNefesh? Abba and Ima, the father and mother, give birth to the Midas. Midas and Meichin are not of the same personality. Midas is sakshus, excitability, ispilus. It's an emotional feeling. A mind, as he explains, is detached. A mind doesn't have feelings. A mind is an objective observer, a healthy mind. Then there's a second type of ilah v'ol, where they're made up of the same thing. An example he gives is a branch from a tree. A tree grows, A tree naturally. So a branch is an effect from the cause, which is the tree, but it's the same personality. It's it's growing out of the tree. It's an extension of the tree. It's not a separate entity. So in explaining so now in this chapter, Lamates, he primarily focused on the first ilval, Meichen and Midas. But to explain it, he went into a whole discussion and saying, so how are these Midas born from Meichen? They're separate entities. So he explains it because Meichen itself also has Midas Sheba Meichen. That when a person conceives of an idea and develops it, there comes a point where you get excited, but we'll call it intellectual excitement. It's not emotional excitement. It's like you reading and saying, "Oh wow, this is amazing." That doesn't mean, like he says, that it's amazing for me. The thing is amazing. Like you could learn or consider this about the power of a neshama, and then say, "Wow, every Jew is an amazing thing. It's a soul that God sent to this earth. Every soul has unbelievable power." That still doesn't mean you like everybody. Like a lot of people say, he's a great guy, but he's not for me. Why don't you go love him? You know, that's not what we're talking about. So then there's Meichen Midas, Sheba Midas as they stand on their own, where you say the word's exactly what he says. He says Meichen will say this thing is good. Midas will say Midas not a Meichen. Midas Sheba Meichen will say this thing is good. Midas on itself will say it's good for me. Basically, it's the difference between objective good and subjective good. So he explains that the birth of Midas, the way real midas, which means that it's good for me, is born from first saying that it's good in general. So really there's three levels. There's a person contemplates something, there's no feelings at all. As he gets deeper into it, he begins to arouses a feeling, but it's a midas sheba meichen. And it's not from the same substance as meichen, it's already a spilus. But it's a spilus that's intellectual type of excitement. And then that gives birth to a real midah, which is that it's good for me. So it's not just that the thing is likable, but I like it, and that brings a avos Hashem, yiras Hashem. So we can, in our minds, we can appreciate God, but it doesn't still mean that you love God. It means that you think it's good to love such an entity. Whether you're loving it or not is not necessarily there yet, because a mind by nature is detached. The kavanah, of course, is to come down. So here we see an ilah of one entity different than another, but one giving birth to the other. It's literally like a child. A child is not going to be a clone of its mother or father. It's a separate entity. A child can end up doing things that are very different than their parents. Not like a branch of a tree. But it comes from, the cause of it are the parents. And in this case, the meichen. And then he says, at the end of this chapter, he says, in other places it explains that midas sheba meichen is not really midas. It's meichen. That part of intelligent understanding of something is that you have a spilus, that you appreciate the thing. And in that case, then the birth of Midas is not really the birth of a new entity. In this case, it would be, he said, that in this case, the effect will be actually a reflection of the source. So this, he's just qualifying and saying that you could also explain Meichen Midas like the second type of Ilav Ol, that it's a reflection. It doesn't elaborate, but essentially it really comes down to when the excitement in the mind, is it a Midas-dika thing or is it a Meichen-dika thing? You can really interpret it both ways. So the primary way is to say it's a Midas-dika thing, but it's still in Meichen, so it's not yet, it's not about what's good for me, it's just that it's good, but it's a different personality. I mean, it's a very Dakas-dika difference, a very subtle difference, because either way it's not pure Meichen. The question is it more Meichen or is it more Midas? Either way, he basically focuses on those. So all this is coming, is still middle of explaining and trying to understand that Chochma and Bin are fundamentally different. So he's going to conclude this in the next chapter that we're going to learn now. We had a discussion about this Chitzenius, his Pashta Shaleh, that he said a line here. I just want to comment on that, and one more thing after that. That since the effect is not from the same Mahus as the cause, Midas is not the same personality as Meichen, it's a different entity. She says, so when you say that the cause encompasses the Ol, it's only the Chitzenius Hispashta Shalei Levad. So I initially interpret this as being that the Chitzenius Hispashtas of the Midas. Because real Midah comes out when you have a real emotion, when you feel that it's for me. Like he says, the definition of a Midah is Hergish Atzmi. That I feel something. In Meichen, it doesn't matter what you feel. You know, for example, someone can come to you as a judge or as a rav or a mashpia And someone will ask you, is it good to smoke? And you'll say, no, it's not good to smoke. And then he sees you smoking. Because you're telling him what the facts are. What you're doing personally is not going to affect your midas. I'm just giving you a stupid example. Huh? Yeah, right. So he says, so I was interpreting it in the context, but it appears, especially from the kitzur and also the parentheses right afterwards, that Chetzenis Pashtus is referring to that the midas in the meichen is only the outer part of meichen. It's not essential meichen. And truth is, both is basically, bottom line is that the two things are separate entities. Because in the parentheses he also said, that the bina is a different separate from Chochma, and therefore it comes from the expression of Chochma, not from the essence of Chochma. Anyway, the thing I wanted to add, which I think is very vital, because when you learn this, you could think this whole thing is seemingly a tangent. He's talking about Eres Pnimim, talking about how to connect from our structure to Alakus, which is a big part. Just to use the example I was using, the Esesphere Sagnuzis is the place where God envisions our existence, our reality. It's like an artist who envisions a certain piece of art. Now, this artist could have created other pieces of art. Like he said, Spheres Einketz. There could have been infinite amount of structures. But God chose and wanted to create this type of structure, exactly as we see it. Deimem, Tzemeya, Chaim, Medaber, human beings like us, Seichel, Midas, the whole thing. Being that God envisioned it that way, so we can connect to that part of God. And through that we can connect to the rest of God that's beyond that vision. That's essentially a big part of what we learned. So it makes sense that we have to understand what Er Pnimi is. But this whole detailed discussion of Chochma and Bina, you could argue, what is it, just an example of Er Pnimi? You could argue that. But if you really look closely, it's not the case. The Rebbe Rashab here is showing, based on a fundamental klal, Chassidus is Elam Kotten Zeh Adam, what we call in English microcosm, macrocosm. It's called a hologram. You know what a hologram is? A hologram means that there's images, that every detail of the image has the whole image within it. Basically the concept microcosm, macrocosm, which means it's not like two worlds. You have things that are small and things that are big. Even the big things reflect in the small, and the small things are microcosm of the big. So a human being, we have within us Deimim Semeach Chaim Medaber. We have mineral is our bones. We have like Semeach is hair and nails. Chassidus says Chai is like the chayes that we have, our emotions, like an animal. I don't mean like an animal, so like a beast, but like we're alive. And then Meichen is Medaber. We have the ability to communicate, to think independently, and so on. And it goes much more details than that. So everything is a microcosm, macrocosm. Which is why also in the Elamis you have Atzilus, Abiyah HaProtim, Abiyah HaKlolim. It always is everywhere. But the same is true here. The connection is Chochma and Bina, but microcosm is essentially, really, Eid HaBligvul and Eid HaGvul, Lamaila. So it's not just an example of Eretz Pnimim. That's why he's focusing so much that Meichen Da'ab is Lamaila Mishtalshus. In a way, Meichen Da'ab B'dakus is Esesphere Bliketz, higher than Esesphere Sagnuzis. And Bina is like Esesphere Sagnuzis. So you're seeing the whole thing play itself out now just on a smaller level. So the interface is beautiful, because wherever you go, you have these two dimensions. Something that is in structure, something beyond structure. Wherever you turn. Now you could say the whole thing, you could say Atzilus is beyond structure and beyond structure. So in Atzilus Gufa, you could say Meichen is beyond structure and Midas is structure, which he said. So he's showing here that even in the smallest level, even in Meichen itself, which generally, as he spoke earlier, Midas is existence. I feel something. That's me. So he says, in Meichen too, you also have a part of it, it's me. Bina is more structure, and Chochma is beyond structure. So this is not just a Maimer HaMuzgar or a detailed explanation of Eretz Pnimim. It's also that. But it's also a taste of the interface working, so-called, within Seder Shtalshus as well. And this is going to be very relevant later, because later Chochmas Tema becomes a major theme of being the real place where the world structure, existence meets beyond existence. So the mind, the fact that God created a mind, I'm just giving a preview of what it's going to say later. The mind, if we were not created with a mind, we'd have no way to have, Bal Pi Seichel, a relationship with Eibishter. Like I said before, a slave and a master and a slave, an Eved and an Odin. The Eved doesn't have to have Seichel. He has to just fulfill what God wants him to fulfill. If God wants him to have Seichel, so it's also, but for him there's no difference. But if you want a relationship, the way the structure of existence, if we want to have a relationship, we have to know what God is about. We have to learn about it. You want a relationship, I need to know who you are. That's why Moshe has these long discussions with Eibishter. Who are you? What's your name? Tell me something about yourself. The whole discussion on Har Sinai after the Chet HaEgel is about, tell me who you are. Hareini noch vedecha. And Eibishter says, you could see me, you can't see me, my face, my back, whatever. The bottom line is, it's a discussion of, I need to know who you are. Why does he need to know who you are? You're a creature, and he's a creator. Because God wants a relationship. It's like a ish v'isha. Matan Torah was a chasana. It wasn't just an encounter between heaven and earth. It's called Yem Chasanos. It's a Matan Torah. It's a marriage. And has many, marriage l'mata is nishtalshul from marriage l'mayla. So bottom line is, so the whole idea of Meichen really, the mind an animal does not have a relationship with God. An animal is a creature of God. It's like a tool. You can't say a hammer or a screwdriver or tools have a relationship with the one who's using them. You could say they're my tools. I need them to do fulfill what I want to get done. But hammer is not going to build a relationship with the person who's using the hammer. When it comes to, however, human being, because we have a relationship. How does the relationship begin? By going out of your own self. An animal was created to take care of its needs. Have children, feed them, hunt, die, next generation. Geendigt. Like like he says in Tanya. They never change their course. A human being, we look up, we start thinking where we come from and what's going on. That's why human beings have neurosis. You never see an animal that has neurosis unless it's under the influence of a human being. They don't have Microcosm. They just do with the job, and that's it. Weitergegangen. Human beings have all kinds of stuff. We're restless. We get depressed. This and that, moods, stuff like that. It's all part of because we're able to go out of our own box. Meichen symbolizes that more than anything else, because Meichen means you can learn something that you're not. If you were just a creature of survival, a product of survival, then all you need to know is how do I eat, how do I hunt, how do I take care of my needs, and that's all that matters. And all your intelligence is what it says about animals, seichel hanikna. Their wisdom is figuring out how to survive. So they're smart in hunting, but there's no such thing as, I want to know where my source is. I want to find out why I'm here. That concept doesn't exist. So bottom line is that you have is a relationship through Meichen, through intellect, brings you to another dimension. So now we're going to learn next chapter. So after talking this whole introduction, we're beginning now chapter 40, page 68. It's all being recorded, so that's why. So now he's going over to the next type of Ilah v'Olol. So it's the middle of the context of all this, as I said, just to repeat and summarize again. He's talking about how Hishtalshelus works, that Bina is connected to a process, Chochma is higher than process. To understand that, the process, he's talking about two types of processes. One is where there's a distance somewhat between the cause and the effect. Distance meaning they're different personalities. And the second is that they are of the same personality, which is what we're going to discuss now, like a tree and the limb of a tree, as opposed to a child coming out of a mother's womb. Both, one gives birth to the next. One is the cause of the other, but one is giving birth to something different than itself, or a separate entity, and one is giving birth to something that's similar to itself. And both we're going to learn is not Chochma. So even though he did say in the parentheses in the last chapter that Chochma and Bina are similar to Meichen and Midas, meaning that Bina is also a result of Chochma, meaning, but it's of a different personality. But as we'll see, real Chochma, the etzem of Chochma, does not have a process because it's a point. This is the reason you cannot dissect a concept. When you conceive of an idea, The moment that you had a flash of an idea, I suggested an exercise. Today you'll have a few ideas in your mind, I'm sure. Remember, as soon as you start talking about an idea, you're already a step away from Chochma. The idea itself is very hard to bottle. It's very hard to describe. What is a pure flash of an idea like without Bina? Can you even describe it? You'll see it's very difficult to do. You can only describe it when you move away a moment from that concept. So the essence of Chochma really is not subject to process. You can't bottle it. You can't do anything with Chochma. All you can do is take the Chochma, turn it into Bina, and flesh it out. The Chochma itself is a point that always remains a point, and that's how it is. It's like the flash of an idea. You can't have that flash more than once. So now he's going now to page Samaches, chapter Mem. And the second type of Ilu v'Olol, cause and effect. Remember, the first one is Meichen and Midas. They're not Oisei Mahus, like you said. They're Mahus Acher. If you want to know the Beis Efana where he began, it's on page 66. Two-thirds down the page, he says, "In Beis Efana, Oisha Ol Hu Mahus Acher Ma'ila, Rak Shenimtza Kol Ba'ila V'Neila Dal Yodei, Oisha Ol Hu Oramin Ha'ila Mistayef Mimenu." So those are the terms. Either the effect is a Mahus Acher, a separate entity, or it is a reflection of the cause, and mistayef menu, an extension of it. That's the natural extension, like the branch of a tree. So now he's going to the second eifin. It's in cause and effect in intelligence itself. So the first ilu primarily explained it is mind and heart, intellect and emotions. One gives birth to the next, but they're separate entities. He says, in intelligence itself, in Meichen itself, in the cognitive process itself, there's also a cause and effect. What are they? Like in the transmission of intelligence from a transmitter, a mashpia, el makabel to a recipient. Literally, mashpia makabel is a transmitter and a recipient. So you have two entities here, cause and effect. But the seichel, the idea, hanishpel al makabel, that is being transmitted to the student, to the recipient, is not a separate muhus from the seichel of the teacher. In other words, the teacher is not giving him, let's say, an apple, and the apple has nothing to do with an idea. He's conveying to him the idea that he has in his mind. He's just conveying it to him on a lower level. But you can't call it a different personality. You can't say it's a different substance. Midas is a different substance than Meichen. Midas, as we spoke, is emotions, it's feelings. Subjective feelings, objective feelings, but it's a feeling. However you explain it. Here, it's seichel, it's just seichel coming to another level. You can't say it's a separate entity, you can only say is that rather it's a reflection, only a reflection from the idea within the teacher and the transmitter. So not only is it a reflection, it's going even further. It transmits from the concept, from the seichel, from the intelligence of the mashpia, not from the essence, not from the guf v'atzmus hameichen shalei, not from the core body and essence of his idea, of his intelligence, only from an external dimension, which is also a reflection. Does he mean that for positive or negative? I think for the positive. That even though it's external, it's also Zogam ha'ara. Or you can say it's negative. But bottom line, however, so he goes on. The chol ha'ara. The bottom line is that it's not a muhus acher. As much as it's not from the etzem of his seichel, it's like the branch of a tree. A branch of a tree is not a new entity. It's made up of the same substance as the tree. And not like, if a branch of a tree suddenly, for example, developed feelings, where did it come from? The branch of a tree is an extension of a tree, and therefore has the same substance as the tree. Midas, though they're born in Meichen, the mind believes to Midas, however he interprets it, whether it's the end of an intellectual process, or it's a new element in the mind, but regardless, it has a different type of personality. Pure intellect is detached, And as soon as you're excited about something, you're already talking about some type of feeling. Here, the seichel is not from the etzem. In other words, you can't say a branch of a tree is the guf etzem ha'etz. The branch is not the tree. It's only a branch of the tree, but you also can't call it a separate entity. So again, this is just, yet another example of how this interface works, where he keeps on this very subtle place, that it is it and it's not it. Because that's the whole point. You want to have something that's independent of the source, but you want it to be also be able to connect to the source. So there's both. It's like let's call it a mediation, for example. Two people who disagree. Now I've given this example many times. Later he uses it. Two people disagree. Like we say in the morning in davening. Shnei ksuvim achishim zeh zeh. Two psukim, two verses contradict each other. Then comes Ba'kasav Ashlishi, comes a third verse, and reconciles. Machriya b'neiam. What's true reconciliation? So many people in mediation will say each one compromises. One person demands from another $10,000. No, they only deserve $2,000. So a mediator will say, you know what? Let's meet halfway. Give him $8,000 difference. Give him $6,000. So you add 4, you take off 4, whatever, and then they negotiate. So they may be happy with the end result, but both of them gave up something. True mediation is where both is win-win, where they both realize something they didn't realize before. They realize that they have something to benefit from each other, and they're not competition. It would be like the mediator would show, these are not two verses that contradict each other. You dig deeper, each one adds something that the other one needs. And they both go away happy because they discovered something new. So real mediation, so when you say, how does God connect to the universe? How do we connect to someone? So you could say either God has to give something up, so it's not so divine, or we have to give something up, so it's not so human. Ultimate goal is that you remain human and you can be connected to God all the way. How is the theme of Ayin Beis, Chassidus in general. So the point here is that we're constantly going back and forth. Like that's why it's so important to understand, is it a muhusacher, is it not a muhusacher? So in some situations you want to have a distance from the other thing. Sometimes you want to find commonality. So like in this case, a branch of a tree is a new entity, but it's not a different entity, even though it's another entity, so to speak. Okay, so the chol ha'ara shabo mebchinas ilav ol behechrach shegam ilav b'chinas ha'ara levad. Because every reflection that comes in the form of cause and effect, you must say behechrach shegam ilav b'chinas ha'ara levad. That also the cause is only a reflection. That's what he meant, Sheigam Kin Ha'ara. He added something now. This goes back to something we learned earlier. It goes like this. When the teacher communicates to a student, so we just said he's communicating of the same substance. It's intelligence. It's an idea. Let's say you want to learn this stuff, like we're learning here. You want to discuss Atzilus. So a teacher may have a very profound understanding of Atzilus. He's explaining it now to a student. He's not explaining to him Bria. He's not explaining to him 2 + 2 is 4. He's not explaining to him what Shabbos is. He's explaining to him Atzilus. So you're of the same substance, same idea. However, it's only a reflection of what the teacher really knows. It's only a reflection like a branch of a tree. Then he says, it also comes from the outer part of the intelligence of the teacher, not from the guf and etzem. And also that outer part in the teacher, there's also a reflection. That's what he's adding. That within the mind of the teacher, there's 2 stages. There's how the teacher understands it and how he's communicating. What he's going to communicate is coming from the outer dimension of what he understands, so it's a reflection. And the student is getting a reflection of the reflection, basically. That's what he says here. The chol ha'ara shabab b'chinas ilav ol, you have to say that also the ilah, if something is coming...
The ilah is the cause?
Yeah, the ilah is the cause. So here's a rule here. The chol ha'ara shabab b'chinas ilav ol. Every reflection that comes like a cause and effect, you have to say that also the cause was only a reflection. What's the reason behind that? Okay, he's going to say in the parentheses. The reason the Bapashtus is because he's going back to what he said earlier. If the teacher was unable to have an outer dimension of his intelligence, how would the jump take place? How is it possible that a student, how could he bring that idea to him? The teacher would not be able to, if the teacher didn't have that type of tzimtzum within himself, then there would be no way you can communicate it to a student. You see this. You see people who are brilliant. They understand ideas. When you ask them to speak about it, you can't understand a word they're saying. And not because they don't get it. They just don't know how to limit their flow. They just start talking. Or don't say anything, whatever it is. So, basically he's saying that if the ill of all, if we're dealing with a ha'ara that comes in that type of process, you have to say the cause is also a reflection and not the etzem thing.
Where is that larger gap?
Between
the etzem or the seif or the ha'ara, or from the rav?
It's a very good question. Based on what he's saying here, I'm not sure. Based on other parts of this hemshech, he usually speaks that the gap is always the lower, the going to the students is usually a bigger gap because you're going outside. So in other words, for example, let's talk, I said this was a microcosm for Lifnei Tzimtzum. For God, who has infinite possibilities to create Esses Sfiris Einketz, for him to decide Esses Sfiris is a closer connection between the Esser and the Bligvul than there is between the Esser before the Tzimtzum than after the Tzimtzum. That's why you need a Tzimtzum. So, because in the source everything is still, for the teacher, his summary or his Tzimtzum, his concealment or trying to express only the outside is only an outer part of his inner dimension. So it's very close to his depth. As a matter of fact, you could even argue more than that. The teacher that can explain to a student something understands the concept better than someone who can't, because he understands the depth of it, so he's able to communicate it to people who don't even have yet the context. But it's a very good question in this whole context, because it ultimately comes down to is that we need both. Sometimes you need distance, and sometimes you need closeness. That's the whole dance of life. That's to create this relationship where you integrate it, but you also realize it's beyond you. You know, you're a bachrim, but one day when you're married, you'll find out this mystique. That it's
Is there any connection
the paradox.
The famous thing?
As soon as you think you got it, you find out you don't get anything. The ego.
Not the same game?
No, because he says clearly before, he says Yesher from the Alter Rebbe, Masha'in Arech Asiyah L'gaba Atzilus is Atzilus Ein Arech L'gaba Ein Seif.
Because usually the Mashpia, the same, the Ashora.
I'm glad you bring it up, because on the other hand you could say that also.
The other way around.
Yeah, the other way around. But I would put it this way: bottom line is, from our perspective, for sure, the Tzimtzum edition, the big jump is the Tzimtzum edition, and the jump from Bligvul to Gvul. Remember, for him, Gvul is also just as Bligvul, so you could say it's Bechal not a jump.
Not a jump. Yeah.
From us, it's a jump.
Yeah.
By God, it's not such a jump. The big jump is actually from Atzmus, built in Mitzias Nimtza, to Eir. That, I think, is the biggest of all, if you really want to talk about big. That an Atzmus built in Mitzias Nimtza wants to manifest so that's in Mamish. The distance between Eir Shekadm L'Kadmusei to Atzmus is probably the most distant of all, when you really get to it, fundamentally. Even though you say it's Kadm L'Kadmusei. That's ultimately, that's where the paradox is. Yeah. The answer to that is because it's Tachlis HaBitl, but God wants a Metzias, so it just comes together. Metzias and Bilta Metzias comes together. I mean, we can't relate it because we see everything as structure, but you could conceptually understand. That's where, I know that's where you want to hang out. The problem is God wants us al korcha chatachai. He wants us after the tzimtzum. All of us, the tendency when we start learning about those higher levels, that's where you want to hang out. I want to know what's going on, Atzmus, and how he gets to Eir. Right, exactly. That's the thing. He wants you in the basement, and then figure out from the basement how to get there. But he says, but more importantly, he says you can't get to the roof if you don't go to the basement. Let's put it this way. This is, and the basement, as we know, can be quite dark. It's not just a basement. That's right. Because the Yesh of Elam Haza teaches you the distance between Eir Atzmus and Eir. See, Eir itself can convince itself it's pretty close, because it doesn't. I have nothing of myself. What do you want, So let's put it this way: a maskir or an eved was dretzach zufil around the melech can zachayin that he's very close, It's when you get out there, you realize that you're also not that very close. We're all equally distant and equally close. But let's go back. We got to go back to Elam Hazeh, so to speak. So anyway, he's going to now explain in the parentheses what he means by, because he said an interesting thing. He said, "Ha'ara shabab b'chinas ilav ol." You could argue, since when is ha'ara a reflection ilav ol? Sunlight is not a effect of sun. I mean, technically it's an effect, but it's Eir and Moir usually don't use ilav ol on that. Ilav ol you usually use on something that is not connected to its source. That's the example. What's the difference between ilav ol and Eir and Moir? That Eir is always connected to its source. Ilav ol can separate. For example, you could cut off a branch of a tree, and it's still a branch, and the tree remains intact. It's of the same substance. So he's just going to qualify this in the parentheses. He's going to say like this: light, or for energy, compared to its source, is not in the form of cause and effect. Ella, what is it? There's two ways he's going to explain. One way you could say is it's a reflection from the etzem. So let's say, yeah, so even though this reflection is lefi eifan etzem, meaning it's commensurate, it's according to what the etzem is like. In other words, for example, Eir HaShemesh is light, sunlight. Eir HaLavana is moonlight. Eir HaNeir is a flame from a candle. It's a different type of light. So even though light is according to its source, each light is different based on its source. Nevertheless, it's infinitely distant from the source. You cannot compare light to its source, as far as they're not close at all. They're completely, one is a source and one is a reflection. Like he says elsewhere. A different way you can explain Eir and Moir. Or the energy or the light is coming through a tzimtzum, a concealment, a removal of the essential energy, and therefore it is infinitely distant. Okay, stop here. So bottom line, he's saying that be'etzem really Eir and Moir are not in the form of cause and effect. Because cause and effect are related to each other. Even though midas, for example, compared to meichen, are a different entity, but they're not infinite and finite. They're in the same world. And also here, in meichen itself, a teacher to a student, he's giving him the same idea. Yes, he's distant from him, he's not on the same level, and so on and so forth. But it's the same idea. Eir and Moir are completely two separate things. You can't call it cause and effect. So he's speaking two ways that it's ein arech. One is that it's a reflection even without a tzimtzum. Even if you don't conceal Eir in one drop, as soon as it's sunlight, it's not the sun. Someone says to you, sunlight and the sun the same thing? No, they're not the same. They're not the same at all. A sun is a whole body. It gives off light. Sunlight can't do anything. Sunlight, all it is expressing. Sunlight doesn't have the power. The sun is a source. Sunlight is an effect. Not an effect, like it's not all, but it's just a reflection. So it's ein arech. Or, if the energy goes to tzimtzum, then for sure it's ein arech. Then it's even more distant. What he's talking about here, this is the end of the parentheses. He's trying to qualify when he said the word ha'ara, he doesn't mean ha'ara as an eir and moir. He means reflection as just as a coming, as outside of the source of the teacher's mind. He doesn't mean it as eir. In other words, when the idea from a teacher goes to a student, you can't compare that to, let's say, the light that comes from the sun. It's not at all that. An example of ha'ara from a ashpi, would be that if you were able to, let's say, you became a meshamish to your teacher, and you just saw his whole being, you became like a shliach. There you could say maybe you're getting a shtikl ha'ara of him. But here you're getting a piece of an idea, just one idea. You're not dealing with a reflection of the teacher here. So he's saying, the one we're discussing here, a reflection that comes in cause and effect, that means there's an erech between the two. There's a relationship. How would you translate erech? There's a proportion, there's a a commensuration, a commensurate. Erech means there's a commonality. There's a commonality between them. There's no commonality between Oyer and Moyer. And through the manifestation of the cause to conceive of the effect, you have to say that the cause also is a reflection, which you can't say with sunlight or with any real Oyer and Moyer. There's no such thing as the Moyer has within it also Ha'ara, and that's why it creates Ha'ara. It doesn't exist like that. There's a Moyer, and it gives off light. That's it. It's an etzem, it's a luminary that gives off light. Here, we're talking about a progression. A progression. How does the progression work? The progression works, it's not a reflection. You're taking an idea. The teacher has to only relate to the reflection of the idea, and then he gives that to the student. So both the Il and the Ol are both in the category of a reflection of an original idea. And this is that the Savas Ol, that when the effect comes into being, emerges, that happens through the fact that the effect has some hasoga from the source. In other words, the student has some comprehension of what the mind of the teacher is like, what the idea is like. No. It can carry and transmit what the Moyer wants, but no, it's like an evidence. It's like a messenger that's just passing on things that doesn't have a relationship to. Forget if it has a relationship, it's an entity. The whole idea of Oyer is a bottle. As soon as you say as a hotep, the hosgarnish, as soon as you have something, you don't belong there. The whole point is that you have nothing, and you have no problem with that. That's the key. That's what the Oyer is fundamentally is not meant to have a personality, or else it ceases being something. I mean, that's really what it comes down. It's a hard concept to relate to because we don't have that so much. We have independence, but a true Oyer has no independence at all. And even if God says to Oyer, "I want you to be independent," it has no idea what what that means. Tell me what to do, I'll do it. But I don't know what that word means. Yeah, Yesh has it.
The Yesh one.
Yeah, and Oyer brings it to the Yesh also, but it doesn't relate to it. Yeah. It's like when I said the example where the guy who couldn't read has someone reading for him, and he reads that his father passed away. So this guy is reading on, and this one faints. So it says, the Oyer brought in the message, but the Oyer doesn't get affected by it. That's the example. Anyway, but now he's adding something. Okay, let's see where he's going with this. Like Midas and Meichen, that's the first ilavol, the emotions and the mind. That happens through the fact that the Ha'aras HaMeichen, there's some reflection of the intelligence within the heart. Like it says, Bina Liba. That the Bina is connected to the heart. That means emotions have in it
the Bina.
Well, the Liba has the Bina. Uba halev mevin lias mezei seres amidus. What's Uba?
In ear.
Right, in ear.
What is it?
Within the heart.
Mit the Bina till Arts versteht.
Uba halev mevin.
What's that?
Uba halev mevin lias mezei seres amidus. The bottom line is that within the midas there's bina, there's intelligence, and with that the lev understands, the bina liba, the lev understands that it should have an awakening of emotions. This is the islapsus, the manifestation of the cause inside the effect. That means that the energy of the mind, intellectual, cognitive energy, manifests, islapsus, and dresses up to be understood, to be comprehended, and felt in the heart. And through this, the formation, the coming into being of the effect is commensurate with and has a commonality with the source. Just a second. Okay. What he's saying here is like this, what he's adding, just to understand what he's adding here. He's trying to build a case here for the fact that this ill of ol, the second type of ill of ol, are of the same substance. That's how he began. Not two separate things. So he began by saying, yes, there is definitely two entities here. And the student does not receive the etzem, the essence of the idea from the teacher. And he only receives a reflection, and only an external. And more than that, even the teacher, that's already an external part of his idea, that one that's going to emerge in the student. So basically the student's getting a reflection of a reflection, to put it that way. Nevertheless, they're still of the same substance. There's still this idea. It's not something new. What I think he's adding here after the parentheses is saying that therefore the student has within himself things from the teacher. He has a comprehension of the teacher. As much as it's a reflection, as much as it's an external, it's still a comprehension of the teacher. And he's giving an example for it, and maybe even a proof from Meichen and Midas. Because Meichen and Midas are even more apart than a teacher and a student. That's the whole point that he made last chapter. And still, Midas have in them something from Meichen. Before he was speaking about how Meichen has within it Midas. Now he's speaking that Midas have something from Meichen. That's Bina Liba. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Exactly. So the emotions have something, and that is what causes them to have to be born in there. So this he did not discuss earlier. So now he's going back to Mashpia Makabel. I was thrown a little because he's bringing Meichen and Midas, which is the other Ilvol. Why is he bringing it here? But it looks like it's almost like a Kol Shkem Kal V'chemer. That if it there's a connection, then for sure here there's one. So he says, V'chein b'mashpia Makabel. Hari Seichel Makabel. Masig Seichel Mashpia. The intelligence of the mind of the student understands the mind of the teacher. And he becomes somewhat similar to it. So I said, there's no relationship here. Eir and Moir does not have that. Yesh Ma'ayin does not have that. Ilav Ol has that. So bottom line, Ilav Ol has all kinds of different things going on. There's a certain separation, because one is cause, one is effect, but there's a certain commonality. That's the bottom line with Ilav Ol. Yesh Ma'ayin, there's no commonality. Eir and Moir, in a different way, there's no commonality. Yesh Ma'ayin is the farthest, because the Yesh B'chlal doesn't reflect the Ayin. In Eir and Moir, the Eir reflects the Moir, but it's not. It's of a different entity. It's not the same. This is a heart. This is a reflection. This is an essence. In Ilav Ol, you're dealing with a process where the cause and effect are far closer to each other. Bottom line. However, you interpret that closeness. So this student is getting a comprehension of the idea within the teacher's mind, no matter how much it's a reflection, no matter how much it's been diminished. It's still that substance. The kirva ola la iluhu masig yeser esa'ila. And when the effect gets closer, when the effect gets closer to the cause, means that he masig yeser, he appreciates even more the cause. Like I mentioned earlier, what means kiruv here? Not physical. It means like when you're closer to the source, you appreciate more of it. So you see here levels. Everything is a levels here, process. Like after a teacher transmits an idea to a student, and kishmai, when you delve deeper, and you exert yourself, that's atzme, yourself. And the idea that was transmitted, and he comes to even a deeper depth and a more internalized understanding of the idea. This means that the effect is getting closer to and elevating closer to its source. So bottom line is like this: a teacher transmits an idea, it's coming from the reflection from the outer dimension, but the effect is the student that's receiving the idea. He has commonality because it's the same idea, just on a different level. Then, as the student wants to understand it better, he delves deeper into it and he climbs closer to the cause. So there's a process here, a real process of gradations, more or less, closer, more distant. As he's going to say, this is a shtalshlos. Chochma doesn't have such an idea. This is only possible really in Bina. So maybe why he brings Bina Liba also. So here we go. So when the student is digging deeper and delving deeper into the concept, he gets closer to the cause. Why? Because through his delving deeper, he goes away from, he discards, he leaves behind. He goes out of his grubkeit, his coarse, what was the word we kept? The crassness of comprehension by Ayin in the subject matter, and he comes more to the sublime, or you could say dakus, subtle and spiritual concept. Remember I mentioned before about time and space. When we begin as students to learn about time and space, you think in time and space as past, present, and future, tall, short, first, second floor, fourth floor. Someone that teaches you, let's talk about Ruchnius now. Ruchnius time and space is defined by measure, how much energy there is. You right away have to go to a different place. Now, how well you'll understand that is going to be how far you go away from your Chumnis HaSaga to a more edel approach. As long as you stay with your crass tools, you're never going to get it. I'll give you an example. There was a physicist in the 30s, I forgot his name. So he was asked, how can all these physicists come to all kinds of weird conclusions about subatomic particles? There's a lot of bizarre ideas in quantum mechanics. We won't go into them right now. And no one ever saw an atom, let alone a subatomic particle. So he gave an unbelievable example. He said, imagine a fisherman spread his net across all the seas and started collecting all types of fish. And started documenting the fish. Blue fish, red fish, green fish, this size, this species, this shape, this form. He documents all the fish. Then he comes up with a brilliant conclusion after studying it all and seeing all the measurements. He says, there are no fish in the sea that are shorter than a half-inch long. And he's about to make an announcement to the whole world that he discovered something. There's no fish shorter than a half-inch long. Look, he did all the documentation. He spread the sea. He went over all the seas, and there's not one fish shorter than a half-inch long. Brilliant. So he's about to make the announcement. He's rehearsing it. And his little kid walks into his room. The emperor with no clothes, right? The kid walks into the room and says, what? He says, there's no fish. This kid says, what do you mean there's no fish in the sea? I've seen fish. And the child looks at the net that his father used. The net has half-inch spaces. So all the fish that are shorter than a half-inch fell back into the water. This was his example. He says, you coming to a conclusion, the things, you don't first look at what tools you're using. Someone will say, there's no such thing as love, because I can't see it. I don't know what shelf is it on? What store can I buy it in? There's no such thing as truth. There's no such thing as God, for that matter. It all depends what tools you're using. So no problem. If the professor would get up and say, when I use a net that has half-inch spaces, I will never catch fish that's shorter than a half-inch long. But no one needs him for that brilliance. That everyone can figure out. So this is very much how we relate to things. We use Chumnis HaSaga is when you use your immediate tools. If you want to refine yourself, you have to refine your tools. It's not just, I'm going to get a new idea. Sometimes you have to push it, go into a whole different echos thinking. Think out of the box. Here's another example of just show people, solutions. When you hear a wise person give you a solution to a problem that you were struggling with, you'll always see that their solution is not just they had something you didn't think of, something you never would have thought of, because your whole mindset doesn't think like that. It's a whole different quality. So they have this mind like a quiz, mind game, but thinking out of the box. You're looking for a shidduch all your life. You're desperate. You're looking for your soulmate. You're driving down the street, and you see a woman that looks nice, and you're attracted to her. I said, maybe it's my soulmate. But right near her, standing a guy that is like a person who's like a cripple, with an attendant. And they wave you down, and they say, we need a ride quickly to the hospital. What do? What's the ethical thing to do? You're looking your whole life. Should you pick up the girl and say, let's go on a date? Or should you take this guy to the hospital? So you can have people arguing about this for hours. If you think from the perspective of your responsibility for yourself, take care of your needs first. Someone else can drive the guy. If you think about really what's right, you have to do what's right. What do you mean? Who cares about who says this is the right girl for you? Maybe it's not, etc. And then people will debate this forever. And then the solution is simple. Park your car, tell the attendant to drive the guy, and spend time with her. Most people will never come with that solution because they don't think of why should I give up my car. But if it's so important to you, your soulmate, maybe you have to give up your car. Just give you an example of a solution most people would not think of. And everybody benefits. He drives him to the hospital, you have your date, invite the guy. Just give you an example. There's hundreds of things like this. I'm just trying to give an example of what means going out of your chum. It means going out of your mindset and how you see things, and you get closer to the ilah means you begin to refine it more to the point where you can appreciate it on that level. I gave some examples. That's all. I'm interested why he says b'derech klal. He says, and in general, when you do this, when you go out of your crassness, of your way of understanding, you come to a more sublime, a more subtle way of this. Generally speaking, your mind gets more refined through the process. Why is it derech klal? Because it seems to me it every time gets. No, because maybe there are people who can grasp something deeper, but they don't really get refined. What does that mean? But seichel gets refined. Okay. Yesh la'ayin with the b'derech klalis. We need a scenario. Why would someone's mind not get refined by this process? Bleibt in sein Grobkeit. Yeah, maybe like chameleons, they know how to fake it. They can make believe they understand something deeper, and they actually do, but they're not really refined as a result. It's like they play along. Okay, we'll think out of the box for a day, but they don't really think out of the box. Maybe that's what he's referring to. Remember, you have to have a box first before you think out of the box. So anyone tells you they think out of the box, tell me your box first. The Rebbe once said to somebody who got drunk, Purim, he says, first you have Yoda before you get to Adel Yoda. It has to have Ram.
Yeah.
I'm trying to say is before you get to Atzmos, first figure out Akun, Akudim, Unukudim, Vrudim, and Lichten Atzmos. That's true. He's saying the same thing as when you climb this ladder is also with midas and mechen. He's really interchanging between the two ilah v'olas, frankly, but the same thing's midas. That when there's when intelligence radiates in them even more abundantly, increasingly, shenasim hamidas b'chinas dakus bilti murgoshim kol kach. Then the emotions also become in a state of subtlety and refinement that are not sensed and not felt so much. He's really going backwards here. Before he was speaking how meichin has midas within it to bring it down to midas. Now he's speaking how the effect is returning to its source, to its cause, and getting more refined in the process. So in other words, because before the whole point was midas was what's good for me. Now he's saying that when midas are affected by intelligence, they start getting less about me and more about the something more objective.
It's all just to explain to us the second level in
He's going here. 1 second, but he's going to finish it. Yeah. But remember, I told you this is not just a tangent. The thus is negated to the whole interface, because it's about how two entities connect. We're just talking more pratis, but it's the same idea. You can see clearly. You learned this, and we learned before. You read it, mamish. You see similar. The spirit is the same. That is it mitzias? Is it not mitzias? This constant tug of war. Every page in Ayin Beis, I see it. I have not yet seen a page that doesn't address this tug, back and forth, and it makes everybody who's learning it crazy, because you say, is it this or it's that? And the answer is it's both. And
the story of our lives.
Exactly. And it's meant. Someone said to me, "This is making me so." What's the word he used for me? It's so unnerving me, because I can't be at peace. I learn a chapter, and the next chapter says, "But on the other hand," and then you go to the next chapter, another on the other hand. So I said, that's the point. You have to start getting at peace with not being so at peace. You're too. You want to have it all. It's really the truth. There's a type that says, "Talmidei Chacham ein lehem menucha le be'elam hazeh v'le be'elam hab," or tzaddikim. But that says Yom Shekule Shabbos Menucha L'Chai Lamed. Same word, Menucha. Is it complete Menucha or Ein Lahem Menucha? And it says Elam Haba, and Elam Haba also means Lasud Log. So one taich, I feel, and maybe the Rebbe said it once, is like this: that they're at peace with the fact that they're not at peace. There are people that are restless, and unhealthy restlessness, which comes from insecurity or fears or whatever. But then there's a very secure restlessness. You're restless because you are connecting constantly to God, and God is always elusive. That's a healthy restlessness. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with a person that, the Alter Rebbe, they said that they sensed that he had a deep thing, that he's something he desires, that they thought he wanted to be king, Tsar. So he said, no, it's Avos Hashem. It's a burning passion, and you never have enough, and you're never complete. Chelas Ava. When you come to that point, so let me ask you something. Would you replace your neurotic restlessness with that type of restlessness? It's your call. And the Rebbe says it in Teireh, he brings from Zehar, Pasha Shmesh. He says that even when they were Mitzrayim, they worked hard. Right? Chemer is bricks and mortar. They were forced to make these bricks and mortar with a straw. The whole thing. The first obvious question is why the Torah telling us exactly whether it's bricks? Who cares if it's chemer levanim or it's So the Zohar says chemer da kal v'chemer and levanim da libun hilchasa. Chemer refers to a priori. What is that? Kal v'chemer meaning not the word chemer as in bricks, but chemer meaning that from a lenient situation you can derive a more harsher situation. It's two ways of learning Torah, and libun hilchasa is the crystallization of halacha. So the Rebbe asks the question, what kind of, usually a deeper meaning of something has some connection to the meaning itself. Here you're talking about literally two opposites. Here you're talking about struggling Egyptian slavery and Holocaust, forcing them in hard labor. And here suddenly the Zohar goes ahead and teaches Chemer Levenim, Kal V'Chemer, Libun Hilchos. It's a very holy type of. So the Rebbe once said, I remember, he says, everybody in life has to struggle. It's your choice. It's going to be Chemer Levenim, and you're going to work Avedis Perach, working in things that are slavery, work, or you're going to struggle in a Kal V'Chemer, in a concept in Torah, or in how to crystallize an idea. And when you choose the second one, you don't have to have the first one. But everyone has to struggle. If you think life is going to be peaceful, then so it's an interesting idea. So, in case you're struggling, if you can replace the struggle with something more sublime, you won't need to have the other one.
Taking a course by you.
In Teireh Shalom, the Rebbe Rashab said to someone very sharp words. He said, everybody has to be broken. The question is, if you break yourself, it could be b'chesed v'rachmim. If you wait till God breaks you, he said, Rachmana litzlan, you don't want it to wait. That's what he said. I'll show you. He said a line like that. You never saw it? It's very sharp. Yeah, he said such a line. He says, "When Erbrecht is nicht allemal, then it's not in your terms always. So break yourself." No, yeah. Let's put it this way, but then you're not going to ask you then. Yeah, that's how it is. So, we could choose. If you break your head in Ayin Beis, trust me, you'll stay out of a lot of trouble. So that's what if it really bothers you, pshat here, then other things are not going to bother you as much. You just don't have that much time in your hard drive. Okay, fine. See, this is a shtickle verbringen also. It's not just pure learning. We have to bringen Aveda. Okay.
You just have to make sure that you don't go too crazy. And out there was
right, the bagel and putter.
No, I'm saying you still want to be a normal person.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to have a sense of humor. And when they were that misnagel, they were making fun and they were asking Alter Rebbe, The Alter Rebbe wears this very heavy fur coat, and he drives with 3 horses. And what was the thing? And he cuts his nails after a shower or whatever, after the mikveh. You know the story? They were making fun. They were like,
food.
huh?
Eats good food.
Eats meat or something. I don't know the food. I don't remember the food one. The other 3. So they wanted, like, they were like somewhat cynical. The Rebbe, what's the deeper Kabbalistic reason for all these things? So he says the fur coat, because it's colder in the winter, it keeps you warm. The 3 horses takes you faster than 1 horse. And when you cut your nails after the mikveh, the nails are softer. It's easier to cut. So in other words, they wanted to say like so the Alter Rebbe is doing this all. They wanted like some type of make fun of the deeper kavanas. So he told them it's quite practical.
So someone asked the Rebbe once.
There's the krepel, Maismi the krepel. The Mekubal. Shmuel Munkus. He was traveling and he met this the krepel. So he met this the guy, and the guy's like saying, "Where are you going?" "I'm going to meet the Alter Rebbe." "Why are you going?" He says, I'm a Kabbalist and I want to test him, see what he knows." She says, "You want to really test him? Ask him this question." He says, "It's a nakuda, a kav yetzem a nakuda v'misagel, and it becomes of something." Whatever. He gave him some description. So the guy said, "That's good. That's a good one. I'm going to ask him that." He says, so he comes, he asks him the Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe looks at him and says, "That's a krepel. Kreplachar. Krepel, you start with a point and you make a little dough and it becomes a krepel." And later the Alter Rebbe asked Shmuel Munkus, he said, "This is, So Shmuel Munkus said, he says, Shmuel Munkus said, I didn't want to waste the Rebbe's time. So I put him a question so the Rebbe should know right away who he is. Doesn't have to wait and talk to him Kabbalah for an hour and then find out that the guy is shaykh to more than kreplach." Anyway, what were you saying? What was someone saying? Okay, right there. Huh? Yeah, that's the challenge. Or knowing how to masquerade as a normal person. Maybe that's more like it. Okay. So the same thing with midas. So interestingly, now he's moved midas. Before he was talking about how midas, real midas, is that's what's good for me, and now he's saying when midas reach back to their source, their mother, their father, which is intelligence, they become more refined and less murgish, less full of self. Okay, it's not a contradiction. Both are necessary. Well, I will say this. It's beautiful, actually, now that I think about it. Because God is really making us really difficult. He's saying, have feelings, have selfish feelings, subjective feelings, but then make sure you bring them back to me. Instead, he's not saying stay in the mind and don't get involved emotionally. Get involved emotionally, because that's what emotions are. And then make sure your mind, don't let emotions go wild, and just do whatever you like. Bring them back to the source and be more refined. So this is it's called being a real gambler. That's what God is. He gambled by giving us free will. As what's his name said, he said, we must believe in free will, we have no choice. What do you think about that quandary? That's the Yisod. Everyone know about Bechira? That's what you have to... Bechira. We must believe in Bechira, we have no choice. Okay. But Kol Zeh Shayech, now you're going to get the conclusion here. Above Rom. V'kol zeh shayir b'chinas ha'ara levad, and all this is only applicable to a thing which is only a reflection. Because the essence is higher than comprehension. So we now talked 3 pages almost about a whole process, how things evolve from one state to another, and now he's saying, with all this and all the complications, it's still only the process. Because the essence of an idea, that is not subject to process. Like I mentioned before, you can explain somebody music from today to tomorrow. If they never heard music, they're going to know the mitzvahs, and you can study the science of music and all the types of... You put on a song, and they hear a song, that's etzem. There's no process in that. Either you get it, or you don't get it. Now you need both, because you also want comprehension. I'm just giving an example of what obviously etzem is deeper than that. It's just an example. So now he says like this. Okay. And the example from all of this, will be understood above. The whole ishtalshus, the whole evolution and the process of cause and effect is only possible in the level of Ein Sof, divine light and energy, Shenei de Mitziusei v'lei Muhusei, where its Mitzius is known, but not its Muhus. You know that it exists, but you don't know what it's about, what it's really like. The Bechinas HaMitzius de Ein Sof Baruch Hu Shayach HaSoga. In the existence of divine energy, you can have comprehension. And there you have also a process. And the ishtalshus is the order. Sha'ol masig esa'ila. That the effect comprehends the cause, understands the cause. V'nimtze be'erech ha'ila. And it emerges in a way that's commensurate and proportionate with the commonality to the cause. But the essence of something that is not comprehensible, there's no cause and effect. There's no process. This is concluding what he said here. And this is what means that Meichin Da'aba is higher than Ishtalshlus. Va'inyan, Etzem, yeah. Va'inyan, Dihinu Yadu, the Chochma Bina Hein Riyah V'Shmiya. The Inyan this is, because it's known, this is the beginning of chapter 39, he's concluding. Remember he said that the main difference between Chochma and Bina is that Chochma is Tefes Be'etzem HaDover, or Bina Tefes B'Rak Metzias HaDover. I'm reading back in 39. He's now concluding that's Shmiya. First line in 39 is basically the same thing here. So it's the Inyan that's known, Chochma and Bina is seeing and hearing. The Ein Adem is Shmiya L'Riyah. It's a Maimar Chazal. You can't compare hearing to seeing. The Hefesh B'neiim, and the difference between them, Yedua, is also known. The Shmiya, Humarachik. What's the difference between hearing and seeing? They're not just two faculties. They function fundamentally different. You hear something from a distance, which means distance, you hear something, you don't see its essence, you hear it as if it's from a distance. Like a story being told to you. I see a beautiful painting, and I tell you on the phone, or I tell you later, I saw today something beautiful. As much as I describe it, like I said with the music, I'm giving you mitzias. You're a step away. I'm describing to you something that is, if you saw it, you'd have that connection. There's an advantage to Shmi over Riyah too. So the advantage of being over Chochma, but we're talking now this element. So listening to something is one step away, it's a certain distance. It's only the comprehension of the existence of the thing. The Riyah Mekarev, and Riyah is from close. This is very relevant because if you remember the Lashon from Eitz Chaim, that Chochma is Meir Ein Sof B'Kirov Makom, and Bin is Meir Ein Sof B'Richok Makom. He's going to go back to this in chapter 43. So all this is really part of the whole Ma'ila Mata in Ruchnis. It's all part of spatial, conceptual space. The idea of what is space, what's higher and lower in a conceptual way, spiritual way. Because you see the actual thing. You may not comprehend it, but you see it. So when you listen to music, actually listening is not a good example, but I meant when you see something, you may not understand it, but you see the thing itself. Someone say, what is a human being like? And you never saw a human? So I say, here's a human being, look. What is he like? You're going to have to now study what a human being is like. If you just study, you never see the thing, you'll have a comprehension, but it'll only be the mitzias of it, not the muhus. This is what Chochma is samtus hadover. When it comes to Riyah, we call it hisamtus. Hisamtus means, emes is truth, hisamtus is the verb, that something is completely resonates as truth. So when you say, for example, ein eid nasa dayan, a witness can become a judge, because if once you saw it, it became so true to you, you can no longer be objective. So Riyah creates hisamtus. It's like seeing is believing. One of the things that Rambam writes, that why do we believe in Matan Torah? Because we saw it. We saw creation. We saw it with our own eyes as witnesses. There's something in seeing that you cannot deny. Even if it makes no sense. You saw it. Okay, so that's a samtus. Not because of its comprehension. Rather that with the eye of your mind, Chochma ein of Bereshe, with the eye of your mind, he sees it, resonates the truth of it exactly as it is. That's called resonance. So when you in Chochma, the spark of Chochma, you have a flash of an idea. There's a certain truth in that later when you flesh it out, you may not sense that same excitement, that same epiphany. Because fleshing it out is already, how am I going to do something with it? Now, of course, you'd like to have a connection between those two, but that's what he's saying here. So there's that truth, that resonance, the resonance. Like it says elsewhere, it says elsewhere that the seeing, Riyah of Chochma, the sight of wisdom. Here he doesn't mean physical sight. He means the seeing is believing, the seeing as in resonance. Is like seeing the essence of the thing that's higher than comprehension. And this is the level of atzmus ha'chochma, the essence of Chochma. Because remember, before we said there's ha'ara, reflection of Chochma, which the student can get. Actually, he didn't say Chochma, he said it here. Before, in the parentheses, in the end of chapter 39, he said that Bina receives from his pashtus ha'chochma. Okay, but atzmus ha'chochma, this is atzmus ha'chochma. And now comes a parenthesis that ends at the end of the chapter, at the end of the paragraph. I mentioned this before. In Chochma, you also have his qualifying. We just said that Chochma is atzmus, and there's no ishtalshlus in it. There's no higher and lower. So what's going on here? In Chochma we have 10 spheres. The three higher levels of Chochma is the level of Riyah Be'etzem Adover, like seeing something, the essence. That doesn't yet have a relationship with feelings. However, even the feelings within Chochma are also a level of resonance and truth that's higher than comprehension. Like it says elsewhere, Shosik Rav, the Makom Mokum Loi Hoder Bey. It's brought in Chassidus many times. Like it says elsewhere, when Rav was quiet, that was not a silence that of Shtika Keida Adami. It was a silence because it was higher than expression. So Makom Mokum Loi Hoder Bey, meaning that they still followed his ruling. So it wasn't a Shtika where he ended up being like overruled, because that type of silence comes from such a deep truth it's not even expressible. So even though he couldn't explain a reason for it, but it was absolutely resonating truth by him that this thing is forbidden, it's prohibited. But the only thing is, he didn't have a tam musag, he didn't have a reasonable reason, he didn't have a logical reason for it. That's the feelings within Chochma, within wisdom. That it's a type of resonating truth that's higher than comprehension. You know the story with Rabbi and Brisker and the Rebbe Rashab. They were like the two big rabbis in Russia, and with the Maskilim trying to introduce all kinds of different changes, like praying in German and all the other mices there. So there were different asifas. They had meetings, and they would vote on this, the rabbis in Russia, because the Maskilim were trying to change basically tradition. They wanted to assimilate the Jews. So there were different things they compromised, some things they didn't compromise. So then there came the suggestion to print a prayer book, and on one hand side would be Hebrew and the other would be German or maybe another language. And the rabbis, no one saw that it was prohibited. We see that. You have siddurs like that today. But then came the final vote, and the Rabbi Chaim Brisker said he wants to hear what the Rebbe Rashab has to say first. So the Rebbe Rashab thought about it for a moment and said, no, he's against it. Chaim Brisker said, the Rebbe Rashab said, if the Rebbe is against it, I'm also against it, that's it. Because they were the two veto powers. Made no difference with other, therefore it was rejected. Later, Reb Chaim Brisker asked the Rebbe Rashab, why were you so against it? Between you and me, we know that it's mutter, you're allowed.
Studying Russian,
Russian, German, whatever it was.
The language of the Medina.
Yeah. So the Rebbe, he said to him, but between us privately, why were you against it? And it was interesting, he did defer to the Rebbe, he wanted to hear. So the Rebbe said, I'm not sure, but I know I trained myself from a young age, when something is not up in Shulchan Aruch, it bothers me inside. I have a feeling that something's wrong. And I felt this was wrong. So he didn't have a halachic reason, but he just instinctively felt. Later they say, Rabbi Chaim Brisker said that's why he deferred to him, because that's such a hegesh he doesn't have. In other words, that's not coming from just intuition, it's coming from a profound depth of what is true and what isn't true. So even though technically someone will say, can you show me why this isn't right? No. Now, obviously you can't just trust anyone with such an intuition, because a lot of people have intuitions that don't have basis. But when a Rebbe has intuition, you can imagine it's a holy one. My point is that there are things that are midrash b'meichen, like he's saying here, that are, like he says, I say samtus. He has a feeling that something's wrong with it. It has nothing to do with his interests here. We're not talking about subjective feeling. We're talking the opposite. It's a midah in the meichen. He senses it, and that's like by Rav. There's no can't explain it, but it's a certain truth in it. It's essentially how midas assume the riyah of Chochma. Okay, so I said here that there's 10 spheres in Chochma. I thought he was going to ask a question, because l'cheda he's saying there's no levels. He's not asking that, but my answer would be is that Chochma is fundamentally the etzem of Chochma. There's no process. The fact that it has spheres just means there's dimensions of how Chochma manifests. That's fine. That's not an issue. But it probably needs more explanation, because l'cheda the whole point was there's no ishtalshlus. But l'cheda we learned before that Chochma needs a tzimtzum within it to become Yosei Abba, to mashpia to a student. I'm sure he discusses this in the next chapters. What do you know? It's the question in the next chapter, actually. Okay, good. Kivanti. But the bottom line is to sum up. Someone wanted to say. You wanted to say something? Well, let me just sum up this chapter. So, bottom line. What time is it now?
10:14.
Okay, we're gonna have to stop. I was going to finish the mimer, but so be it. We'll have to do it later. What? You'd rather me finish it now?
You can do it in 15 minutes.
15 minutes? I doubt I can do it in 15 minutes. I mean, it depends how deep it is. It's a whole page. It's not so simple. Let me sum up the chapter here, ma'am. So basically, there's the second type of ilav olol, the second type of evolution of steps from cause to effect is in intelligence itself, in the intellect itself, and the transmission from intelligence from the giver to the recipient is not a separate entity. It's an evolution of the same idea, just coming down a level. So he's giving the second example of ilav olol. But both of them, at the end of the day, whether it's meichen and midas, whether it's a separate entity or it's the same entity, they both go through a process. That process does not exist in Chochma. In other words, basically a mashpia cannot give the student in any communication the samtus of Chochma. The student's going to have to come to that on their own. He doesn't say that exactly, but that's bottom line the re'iyah of it, right? He can give him the tools, and the student can reach it. But he gives him the hispashtus of it. At the end of the day, it's a form of hispashtus. Mitzias hadov. Yeah, you have to open your own eyes. He doesn't say it specifically, but it's apparent that's what he means here. So, when meichen and midas, or it's two teacher and student, whether it's in meichen itself, bina reaching to Chochma, let's say, or a student to a teacher rather, or it's emotions reaching to there they can go through a process of how they go down and how they go back up. More refined, less refined. Like he said, how meichen goes down from first there's emotions within the mind, and there's emotions within emotions. And then there's how the emotions become more refined as they go back to their source. In Chochma that doesn't exist. In Chochma you see something, that's it. There's nothing more to talk about. You want to comprehend it? Fine. Now you're in a different dimension, you're in a different mode. It's called comprehension mode. You're analyzing now. But what you saw, you saw. There's nothing going to happen after you analyze it that's going to add to what you saw. You'll understand it. And sometimes you'll appreciate it more. Not always you'll appreciate it more. But the thing that seeing does is a instantaneous thing that doesn't become better or stronger as time passes. I'm elaborating a bit more than what he's saying, but it's apparent that's what he means. Because that's the whole elaboration here. So really we have two types of experience in life. We have experiences that are chochmadic experiences. These are like epiphanies, revelations, seeing things. A spark of an idea. That's an atzmizdik experience. And then we have giluyim dika type of experiences, which is where we comprehend, we appreciate, we go through stages. I understand more, I understand less, and so on. Now, obviously, a person can see a truth and later not live by it. You can slowly forget what you saw. But that doesn't mean the seeing goes through stages. It just means you are a grab jung, meaning you are crass, and therefore you moved away from what you saw as being truth. You're doing your own thing. But the moment of truth was a moment of truth. Those are the two things. So all this teaches us what? That Chochma is different than Bina fundamentally. This is Chochma is Bekiruv Mokim, and Bina is Berichuk Mokim. All this is explaining space in Ruchnis. So Chochma's place is higher than Bina, fundamentally different type of experience, and it helps us in the interface because Chochma is represents more
beyond
the higher beyond, exactly higher than Ishtalshus, and Bina represents Ishtalshus. Okay, that we have to learn more. Right? He talked about this aspect of Chochma, what we just discussed now. Now, if you guys have such a taiva for learning Chassidus, I can do another page. But what? The thing is, it's going to be a whole subject matter. Let's. I'm going to stop here. You want to? Chapter Mem, page 68. Yeah.
Logic is very logical.